right now, the political commentator with Young Voices UK, Alex Petropoulos, is here. Alex, good morning.
Good morning, Rosie.
Was it a bit of an own goal for the Chancellor to accept tickets to go and see Sabrina Carpenter?
No, I really don't think so. I think that this sort of penny pinching when it comes to personal expenses, look, I understand the goal. We don't want our politicians to be corrupt and to be beholden to donations, but it's £600 of tickets to go see Sabrina Carpenter. If that's swaying the influence of the government, I think we've got really bigger pictures to be asking ourselves.
It's maybe not about penny pinching, but about optics, that the government were so, when in opposition, cross about sort of any of the financial irregularities maybe of the Conservatives, and said they were going to do things differently. And then actually, if we remember, the first few weeks and months of Keir Starmer's premiership was constantly, we were hearing about freebies of glasses and clothes and corporate tickets. And actually, Keir Starmer said he was going to kind of clamp down on the freebie culture. And this seems to not be consistent with that.
Yeah, I mean, I'll call that out definitely. I've been consistent in defending even the Tories for this, and maybe the current Labour government are sort of facing their own consequences here. But at the end of the day, these are politicians that work incredibly hard, and well, we'd hope that they work incredibly hard. And if these small freebies can mean that they work that next day, that next week a little bit harder, if those tickets to go see Sabrina Carpenter mean that our problems as a country are maybe going to be just so slightly more solved, I'm more than happy to allow it to happen. I understand the optics, but I think actually so many of our problems in politics are downstream of us cutting ourselves in the foot, sort of taking hits to not making the correct decisions because of optics, because of saying, how would it look? When at the end of the day, after 5 years, people aren't going to care about whether Rachel Reeves took £600 to go see Sabrina Carpenter. They're going to care if the problems of the country have been solved.
I agree with you. Rachel Reeves said, I do now have security, which means it's not easy as it would have been in the past. And she said she would declare the value of the tickets, but they weren't tickets you were able to buy. Front page of the Daily Telegraph. I was presenting Times Radio Breakfast on Friday. It was one of those absolutely bonkers days when the airport, of course, suddenly, very short notice the night before, I think they'd made the decision to close the airport at 1:45 the morning before. Heathrow Airport, so says the head of the chief executive of National Grid, said Heathrow Airport had enough power to avoid shutting down. Is this sort of unhelpful hindsight? Because clearly the airport thought it wasn't safe to stay open.
Might be unhelpful hindsight. I think the real message, the takeaway here is that, guys, something's really broken here. If we don't have the critical infrastructure necessary to run the busiest airport in the country, one of the busiest airports in Europe. And I think this is part of a wider story of you look at the infrastructure across Britain, you look at our roads, you look at our train network, now you look at our airport and our electricity transmission systems, and everything seems to be broken. And I know we're going to hear, this was a once in 30-year failure, but you really have to, an observer from the outside puts one and one together and can quite clearly see that we've been struggling to build, and now we're sort of paying the consequences for our inaction.
But I think the head of the National Grid is saying we did have enough resilience here. And clearly we're in this sort of post-event blame game here. But this is Mr. Pettigrew. He said in the Financial Times yesterday, there was no lack of capacity from the substations. Each substation individually can provide enough power to Heathrow. He said it was a question for Heathrow as to why they decided to close down the airport. He said losing a substation is a unique event, but there were two others available. So that is a level of resilience.
That's a level of resilience. And so there are questions on the one hand to say, okay, Heathrow, guys, what's happening? Are you competent? Are you actually solving problems correctly? But at the same time, I think there's an argument to be made that, okay, even if there might have been resilience, which, we're hearing different stories from either side, if it had been a situation where we just have ample capacity, where things are, resilience doesn't mean, you technically have just enough power to keep the lights on. Resilience means you have more than enough such if you lose one, people aren't worried about being able to go on holiday. People aren't worried about being able to make their business trips connections. We shouldn't be in a position where losing just one small part of the grid can throw the entire country into array.
Yeah, with those questions, and the investigation continues. And I do have to say, I think partly the blame game as well. Look inside the Times today. Facial recognition cameras that scan for wanted criminals. The paper is reporting they're going to become a permanent fixture on the high street. Tell us how these cameras work and if you welcome them being sort of installed permanently on our streets.
Yeah, so I'm actually, this is a rare case where I'm pro facial recognition cameras. So the cameras only work when there are police officers nearby. And what they do is they'll look up from a database of bad guys, essentially. And it will, as you walk past, look at you, scan you, say, are you on that database? If you are, it will tell the police officer nearby, hey, bad guy. If not, it will forget you. It will delete you from its memory. It's like it never saw you. And so what you have is you essentially have an extension of a police officer. It's just like if we added 100 more police officers onto that street and they were all looking about. They've all got a list of bad guys memorized in their heads. And they're all saying, oh, bad guy, got him. We need more people on the streets keeping people safe. We need to tackle crime. And so if this is a cost-effective way to do that, I'm all for it.
The privacy campaign group Big Brother Watch have said we're alarmed by the reports. This is going to be a pilot in Croydon. They say it's time to stop this steady slide into a dystopian nightmare and halt all of the facial recognition technology across the UK until legislative safeguards are introduced. Do you understand their concerns?
I understand the direction they're coming from. But I think what they're doing here is they're holding one right as something fundamental. They're holding privacy as something that can never be given up. When in reality, the world we live in is really squishy and messy, and there are trade-offs you have to make all the time. And yeah, privacy is really important, but also so is safety. And so is not having your phone stolen from you in the middle of the street in London in broad daylight. So is being able to feel safe in your city and not have your property and your health be threatened. And so when you're taking these trade-offs, you've got to take the big picture into account. And the big picture is that crime is getting worse in London, and we've got to do things to solve it. And the fact that I think in this particular case, this is a technology where they are being responsible. There are safeguards in place. We should definitely push back if any of the safeguards that I mentioned before do get sort of tweaked, do get sort of loosened. But as it stands, I think this is a move we should be making.
Let's talk about potholes. My goodness. The sort of bottomless pit of money that gets spent, it seems, on... Sorry, not bottomless pit. I think people would hope it would be on potholes. Yesterday, the Prime Minister announced a £1.6 billion fund to repair roads. He's told councils, though, prove you are filling potholes or risk losing funding. Is that the right strategy?
I think this is the wrong strategy. I think that councils need less of central government involvement, less of central government sort of sticking their fingers in and saying, hey, you've got to spend your money on this. Hey, you've got to spend your money on this. By the way, we're not giving you more money. Okay, in this case, they are giving more money. But I think the story, by and large, is that councils are burdened with this massive legal obligation to spend money on things like social care, spend money on things like local services, which are valuable, but it's really out of balance with the amount of funding that they got, the amount of pressure of problems that they have to solve. And so I think that if the central government is coming in and saying, sort of shouting and wagging its fingers at local councils without also acknowledging the massive burdens and the massive amount of duties and tasks that they've essentially slowly and incrementally increased asking the council to do, I think that's being a bit unserious. If they were more serious about solving the potholes, maybe they'd say, okay, can we look at a way of lowering the burden of duties that councils have to deal with, or yes, give them more money.
So you're saying it's a problem of how local councils are funded. The Sunday Times had a big piece on this yesterday, actually. I think the reality, Alex, is local elections are coming up in May. And so what will happen is the state of roads, potholes, they'll be in parties' campaign leaflets. And so Keir Starmer particularly, we want to be keen to say, look, I've delegated the power over and I've given more money to local councils to do something about it so that they, particularly the Labour Party, can have something positive to say when we come and vote. I mean, they're expected to do extremely well at the local council elections. Kemi Badenoch last week was sort of giving extremely downbeat predictions of how they will do. But inevitably, local elections means a focus on our roads.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty shrewd political analysis. It's a bit sad that local elections come down to are the potholes filled, but maybe it is emblematic of it's a proxy measure for how capable councils are. So if this is the test that we sort of put out and we say, look, this is your chance to prove your medal, to prove your worth, go fix the potholes. I guess it's a test for the British public to see and make their decisions when it comes to elections.
Now, final thing, Alex, I grew up on a TV diet of two programmes that I was allowed to watch, really. That was News Round and Blue Peter, which in some senses have sort of become my adult personality, sadly. Big enthusiast, keen on activities and the news. Blue Peter, though, is ending their live broadcast after 66 years on air. It has made me feel really nostalgic reading this piece. Our boss, actually, of Times Radio, used to be the editor of Blue Peter. He's going to be on Times Radio Breakfast a little bit later to talk about it. But it is sort of an end of an era for what has been such a fantastic programme.
Yeah, end of an era, 66 years. That's wow. That's quite a while. I will admit, haven't watched Blue Peter. Was not part of my growing up array of television shows. I think I was more of a Thunderbirds Argo fan.
You missed out. It was absolutely chaotic at times, completely brilliant. The presenters just brought you into their lives and in such a charming way. And when the pets died, it was sort of a real moment. I remember at school we had a real moment and one of the Blue Peter dogs passed away. Sadly, I can't remember the name. Alex, thank you very much. I really appreciate it, Alex.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
The papers with me this morning.